Hey, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder about merch that I have on my website, the official Booze and Booze website, www.boozeandbooze.net. If you go order a crew neck bundle or a hoodie bundle right now, I will include a t-shirt for free and all of my stickers for free. I believe there's 7 or 8 stickers total, and then a t-shirt of your choice. Just add that t-shirt to the checkout along with the other bundle and use the promo code FROSTY, FROSTY, at checkout, and it will automatically deduct the money from the t-shirt. And I'll send all of that to you ASAP for the Christmas season, or you or loved one, whatever. All right, that's it. That's all. Just wanted to give you a reminder. I'll pin that in the comments section, as well as it's always in the description, www.boozeandbooze.net. All right, I love y'all. Cheers. Here's the stories. Fishing was everything when I was a kid. It was my dad's idea of quality time, dragging me out to the streams before the sun even thought about waking up. The mornings were freezing, and the air always smelled like dew-soaked earth and algae. My first memory is standing knee-deep in a creek, clutching a rod way too big for my hands, and trying not to cry because my boots had leaked, and the cold was biting into my toes. But by the time I was a teenager, fishing was something I didn't dread anymore. It was something that I lived for. James and Colton were my best friends back then, and we fished almost like it was our job. It was what really tied us together, more than school, more than sports, or whatever drama that swirled around us in the time. Every weekend, every summer day, we'd disappear into those woods, loaded down with tackle boxes, coolers, and our rods. Our parents never really worried. The unspoken rule was pretty simple: respect the land, don't be stupid, and come home when you said you would. We stuck to it for the most part. Those were the days of small streams and lazy rivers, where the water barely even reached your knees and the trout practically jumped into your hands. Sometimes we'd find turtles sunbathing on the rocks, or catch crawfish just in the shallows, laughing like we discovered treasure. It was innocent, simple, and fun. The kind of thing that makes childhood feel like this endless summer. Then we got older and the lakes now came into play. Now the lakes were different. They weren't the tame bubbling streams that we'd all grown up with. They were deep and dark, their surfaces calm but their depths unknowable. Fishing there felt like stepping into a whole nother world. The rules that we'd learned quite didn't apply in those situations. Colton's dad had this old aluminum boat. It was dented, scratched from years of use, but it floated, and that was enough for us. By the time we were 16, he'd let us take it out on our own, provided that we swore up and down to be responsible with it. And again, we were, most of the time. That summer night started like any other. We'd seen some videos online of guys fishing in the dark, pulling out these massive bass and catfish under the glow of their headlamps. It looked incredible, the kind of adventure that we could not resist doing ourselves. When Colton brought it up, James and I were on board immediately. Colton's dad helped us get everything ready: extra batteries for the lights, a portable heater, and enough bait to last us the whole night. We packed up the boat like pros, double-checked the trailer hitch, and headed out just as the sun began to set. We told our parents that we were going to Miller's Pond, a spot that we'd fished 100 times prior, and, well, that wasn't a lie, not really. It just wasn't the whole truth. Our real destination was Lake Everly, a good 30 minutes past Miller's Pond, and way out in the sticks. None of us had been out there before, but Colton had heard about it from his dad's fishing buddies. "Big fish," he said, eyes gleaming. "Nobody ever goes out there." That should have been a red flag. Instead, it was an invitation. We pulled into that empty parking lot just as the last sliver of daylight disappeared behind the treetops. The lake was huge, stretching out like a sheet of black glass. The far shore was swallowed up by the darkness completely. It was beautiful in this way that made my stomach twist. James killed the truck engine, and for a moment, the only sound that we heard was the chirping of crickets and the gentle lapping of the water against the rocks. "You sure about this?" James asked. He was always the cautious one, always thinking about what could go wrong, and it drove Colton absolutely crazy. "What's there to be sure about?" Colton shot back, unhooking the trailer already. "It's a lake, not the Bermuda Triangle." I laughed, but it felt forced. There was something around in that stillness that just unnerved me, like the lake itself was watching us, but I chalked it up to just it being a new territory, our first time ever coming out to something this big, and at night. We launched the boat without any trouble, the motor sputtering to life as Colton gave it a few solid pulls. The beam from our headlamps cut through the dark, bouncing off the rippling water as we pushed out towards the middle of the lake. The world just shrank around us. The shorelines faded into shadow until it felt like we were the only people left on Earth. And for a while, it was absolutely perfect. The air was cool but not too cold. The water so still, it felt like we were fishing on a mirror. We cast our lines out, settled into the quiet, and just waited. When my rod jerked in my hands, the thrill was instant, electric. The trout that I reeled in was big enough to make Colton whistle in appreciation. "Good start," he said, slapping me on the back. James wasn't having as much as luck as I was. After an hour, he'd barely even gotten a nibble. "Let's move," he said, reeling in his empty line. "The spot's dead." Colton grumbled, but he didn't argue. We fired up the motor again and began drifting deeper into the lake. And that's when we saw something bobbing in the water just at the edge of our lights. At first, I assumed it was a log, but as we got closer, it became more evident that it wasn't any kind of debris. It was a small boat, aluminum like ours, floating aimlessly in the middle of the lake, but there was nobody in it. "Think they're night fishing too?" James asked, though his voice didn't carry any conviction. "If they are, they're really not good at it," Colton joked. But there was a small amount of tension in his tone that he definitely couldn't hide. We killed our motor and let the boat drift closer. "Hello?" I called out, my voice loud in the stillness, and I got no response. The other boat just gently rocked in the water. My pulse quickened. Something about all of this felt wrong, though none of us could really say why. "Maybe it broke down," James suggested out loud. "Who leaves a boat in the middle of the lake, though?" Colton muttered. We were close now, maybe 20 feet away. The beam from my headlamp caught onto the other boat's interior. My stomach turned. The bench sheet was smeared with something dark and wet, and there was a tangle of something that looked like hair sticking to the edge. "The hell is that?" James whispered. Nobody answered. I felt a pull in my chest, this primal urge to just go, get out of there. But I couldn't look away. As we drifted closer, the details sharpened. The dark stains weren't just water. They were blood, fresh blood. And the hair wasn't just hair. It was attached to something pale and fleshy, hanging over the small motor at the back. "Oh God," Colton choked out. My throat tightened, breath coming in these shallow gasps. "We need to go," I said. "Now." James didn't argue with me. He scrambled to start the motor while Colton grabbed the nearest flashlight and began scanning the water around us. The beam flickered over the ripples and shadows, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound except for the sputtering of our own engine. "Hurry up!" Colton hissed, his eyes darting between the shoreline and the water. The tension rising in the air was suffocating, every second stretching off into eternity. Finally, the motor roared to life, and James spun us around and headed back towards the ramp. My heart was pounding in my chest as I kept my eyes on the other boat, now shrinking back into the distance. I could not shake that feeling, though, that something or someone was still watching us as we drifted away. We didn't say much as Colton backed the boat away from that bloody mess. All the while, James kept shining his flashlight on it, his face pale and stiff, until Colton barked at him to stop. "You want to see more?" Colton snapped. "We've seen enough, dude. Just turn the light off." James hesitated, but he clicked the light off and the boat completely disappeared into the dark. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We leave." Colton's words were sharp and final. He revved the motor and aimed for the shore. "We're not sticking around to find out what did that." None of us argued. The air around us was completely different now, heavier even. The soft lapping of the water against the boat's hull seemed louder, sharper. The occasional rustles of the leaves and the hoot of an owl felt too far away, almost like the lake had pushed them back. It was just us, the water, and whatever else was out there. Colton kept the engine low, trying to avoid making too much noise, but it felt like the hum of the motor was broadcasting our location to everything out in the darkness. I sat rigid, scanning the water and the faint outline of the shore. James held his flashlight tightly, ready to flick it on at a moment's notice. "You hear that?" James whispered out suddenly. We all froze. At first I thought it was the sound of a boat's motor, but then I caught it. A faint rhythmic splash like something larger moving throughout the water. The sound was emanating from behind us. "Go faster," I urged Colton. "I'm not trying to wreck," he shot back, but he did push the throttle a little harder. The boat picked up speed, skimming the water, but that splashing behind us grew louder and more frantic, as if whatever it was quickly trying to catch up to us. "Turn the light on," I said to James. "I need to see it." "And what if it sees us?" James hissed back. But he turned the flashlight on anyway, aiming it at the back of the water behind us. For a moment there was nothing, just ripples and blackness. Then the beam caught something, a pale glistening shape that dove under the surface before we could make sense of what it was. "What the hell was that?" Colton's voice cranked out. "Just go, dude, just go." The boat lurched forward as Colton pushed the engine to its limit. That splashing behind us faded, replaced by the roar of the motor and the rush of the wind in my ears. I kept glancing over my shoulder though, half expecting to see something just burst out of the water, but that lake remained eerily calm. Once we finally reached the boat ramp, we all worked in this panicked silence, hauling the boat onto the trailer with all clumsy and trembling hands. Every sound, the creak of the trailer, the clink of the metal hooks, was like inviting whatever it was out there to come closer. "Hurry up, man, hurry up," Colton snapped, his eyes darting around that shadowy parking lot. "We're not staying here any longer than we have to." As we secured that last strap, I heard it again. The sound of something now moving in the woods, heavy and deliberate. It was really close too. James froze with that flashlight trembling in his hand as he pointed it towards the noise. The beam caught nothing but branches and darkness, but that sound didn't stop. It felt like it was circling us. "Get in the truck," Colton shouted. We scrambled into the cab, slamming the door shut just as something crashed through the underbrush. Colton didn't wait to see what it was. He gunned the engine and the tires screeched as we sped off of that lot, and then back onto the narrow dirt road that led back to town. The drive was silent except for the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. None of us looked back, and none of us wanted to see if we were being followed. When we finally pulled back into Colton's driveway, the first rays of dawn were creeping up over the horizon. That soft light should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It just made everything feel more surreal. We'd stepped out of a nightmare and into a world that didn't know what we'd seen. Colton's dad was already waiting for us, leaning against the porch railing with a cup of coffee in hand. That easygoing expression vanished the moment that he saw us. "What happened?" he demanded, setting his mug down. We spilled everything to him in this frantic, jumbled mess. The other boat, the blood, the thing in the water. His dad listened without interrupting, and his face growing graver with every word said. When we were done, he just stood for a moment, staring at the ground. "You boys are sure about this?" he finally said. "We know what we saw, Dad," Colton said. "All right," his dad replied, nodding slowly. "First thing we gotta do is call the sheriff. Then we're calling your parents." Nobody argued. By that point, we just wanted somebody else to take over, somebody who could make sense of what had taken place. The sheriff arrived within the hour, a stocky man with a gruff demeanor who didn't seem to know what to make of our story. He asked us to take him back to the lake, but none of us wanted to go. Colton's dad offered to guide him instead, and we stayed behind, huddled up in the living room with cups of coffee that nobody even drank. Later, when Colton's dad returned, his face was pale. The sheriff did indeed find the other boat, and just as we described it, but there was no sign of whatever had been in the woods or in the water. They towed the boat back to the station for further investigation, but Colton's dad didn't seem too hopeful. "They're gonna write it off as some kind of animal attack," he said, shaking his head. "But that doesn't really explain everything." He didn't elaborate anymore, and we didn't ask any more questions. I don't really think any of us wanted to know. In the days that followed, the story spread through town, growing more distorted with every retelling of it. Some people said we'd seen a bear. Others whispered about something more sinister, something that didn't belong in the water nor the woods. The official report listed the incident as inconclusive, and the case was quietly closed. We were grounded for the rest of the summer, our parents furious about the lie that led us to Lake Everly. But even as we sat in our rooms, staring out at the endless days of wasted sunshine, none of us regretted leaving. Whatever it was out there, it wasn't something that any of us really wanted to understand. It wasn't something I don't think we were meant to understand. I haven't been fishing since that night. My rods and tackle boxes are sitting in the garage, gathering dust. Relics of time where the world felt safe and predictable. Occasionally, my thoughts drift back to Lake Everly, and I think about that blood in the boat, and whatever the hell it was in the water, those sounds in the woods. I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for somebody else to wander too far into the dark. The job wasn't anything special. You didn't need a college degree or even much training beyond a few weeks of classes and a little bit of hands-on practice. But what you did need was a head for heights and a willingness to work these really odd hours. That was the trade-off: decent pay and steady work in exchange for being the guy who gets called when something broke at 2 a.m. I'd been a lineman for 3 years by the time it happened, and I liked the job well enough. Most days were fairly predictable, replacing worn out lines, trimming back trees, and making sure that everything was up to code. Those big jobs like installing new power poles or stringing fresh wire throughout miles of untouched forest, those were pretty far and few between. Mostly it was just routine maintenance, the kind of work that didn't really stick out in your memory. It was midsummer, hot even as the sun went down. I'd spent the day sweating through my shirt in the 80-degree weather, working on a section of line that ran between a strip mall at the edge of town. By the time I got home, I was too tired to do anything else but just collapse onto the couch and pass out with the TV still on. My phone woke me up and I fumbled for it in the dark, groggy and disoriented. Before realizing it was my work cell, the office number flashed on my screen. I quickly glanced at the clock, 1:47 a.m. "Oh, this better be good," I muttered, answering the call. It was Lisa, our dispatcher. Her voice was apologetic but firm.
"Hey, sorry to wake you. We've got an outage up in Clearwater Ridge. Ted is out sick and nobody else is available."
I groaned. Clearwater Ridge wasn't just up near anything. It was miles of wilderness, dense forest, and rolling hills with nothing but dirt roads and the occasional hunting cabin. The lines out there were connected to our town and the next one over, 60 miles away. If something went wrong, it could take hours to find the problem, let alone fix it. Can't it just wait until the morning? I asked, already knowing the answer.
"It's a critical line,"
Lisa said.
"Half the town's power runs through it. We really need you to at least check it out."
I sighed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "All right, text me the coordinates."
"Thank you.
She said, sounding genuinely relieved.
Be sure to be careful out there."
10 minutes later, I was dressed and in my truck, a massive bucket rig with enough tools and spare parts to handle just about any electrical problem. The cab smelled like grease and old coffee. The dashboard lights cast this faint green glow as I punched in the coordinates into the GPS. The route took me northwest, away from the lights of town and into the thick, unbroken blackness of the woods. The first few miles were easy, paved roads with the occasional street lamp, even a gas station still open for the late night crowd, but soon, the asphalt gave way to gravel, and the world outside the truck turned into this tunnel of trees. The headlights barely even seemed to penetrate the darkness in front of me, the beams swallowed up by the dense canopy overhead. I kept up one hand on the wheel and the other on the radio, checking in with Lisa as I drove. "I'm about 10 miles out now," I said. "No sign of trouble yet."
"Copy that,"
she replied.
"Let me know when you get your eyes on the line."
The further I went, the quieter it seemed to get. The hum of the insects faded, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't until I spotted the sagging power lines ahead of me that I felt a flicker of relief. At least I found the problem. I pulled over and killed the engine, stepped out into the cool night air. The world around me was silent, except for that occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I grabbed my flashlight from the truck and swept the beam along the line. The wires were drooping, but still attached to the poles, but clearly under some kind of strain. Looks like some sagging near marker 12, I reported into the radio. No sparks or breaks yet. I'll start walking the line to see if I can find the cause.
"Got it,"
Lisa said.
"Keep you posted."
I grabbed my tool belt, started down that dirt path that ran beneath the line. My flashlight cut through the dark, but didn't seem to do much in the uneasy feeling that was quickly creeping up my spine. Something about that stillness around me just felt wrong for some reason. About a quarter of a mile in, I heard a faint rustling just beyond the edge of my light. The rustling at first was soft, too faint to even notice, but once I caught it, I could not unhear it. It would come in these waves, like someone or something was pacing just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I would sweep the beam toward the trees, but all I caught were thick trunks and tangled underbrush. I felt stupid, but I called out hello. Probably an animal, a deer maybe, or even a raccoon scavenging the dark, but the silence that followed was suffocating. Nothing responded, just the steady hum of the power lines above me. I turned back to the path, shaking off that unease. "You're spooking yourself. It's late. You're tired," I muttered. "Just focus on the job." The sagging lines led me to a power pole that leaned slightly to one side, its base partially uprooted by what looked like a fallen branch. The wood was splintered, but the damage didn't seem bad enough to cause any kind of outage. I craned my neck, shining my flashlight upward. The wires were still intact. I radioed into Lisa. I found a damaged pole near the sagging lines, but it doesn't even look severe. I'll keep going though, see if there's more down the line. Lisa's voice crackled through the speaker. Got it. Keep me posted. I was about to move on when a flash of light burst through the wires above. A searing electric white spark arced through the air, crackling like a firework. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes, and for a split second, the entire area lit up like daylight. Then I saw figures, 3 or 4 maybe, darting between the trees. They were really fast, and their movements were jerky and unnatural, like marionettes pulled by these invisible strings. My heart began hammering in my chest as the light faded and plunging the forest back into that still darkness. I stood there frozen, flashlight trembling in my hand. Is somebody out there? I yelled, trying to keep the edge of panic out of my voice. Of course, no response. I backed up toward my truck, boots crunching on the gravel. The forest felt alive now, filled with faint rustling and occasional snapping of twigs. I swung my flashlight around me wildly, the beam cutting through the darkness in these frantic arcs, but whatever I'd seen was now gone. Reaching the truck, I felt like salvation. I yanked open the door, ready to grab the radio and call this whole thing in, when I stopped cold. My windshield was smeared with something. It was dark and viscous, the streaks forming a crude circular symbol that looked like it had been scrawled on by hand. My first initial thought was mud, but as I leaned closer, the smell hit me, coppery and raw. It was blood. I staggered back with bile rising up in my throat. Lisa, I said into the radio, my voice shaking. Something is not right out here. I don't know, but I think somebody's messing around with me. The lines are sagging, but I'm not seeing a break. I'll inspect the main pole and then I'm heading back. She seemed to hesitate before responding.
Okay, we got another team en route. Should be there in about 30 minutes. Sit tight if you can.
Yeah, I lied, my fingers gripping the radio like a lifeline. I'll be fine. I didn't want to stay, but leaving without finishing that inspection wasn't really an option. I climbed into that bucket truck, the controls familiar beneath my hands. Powered up the hydraulic lift. The bucket quickly hummed to life, rising steadily into the air until I was level with those lines. The smell hit me first, acidic and metallic, like burning meat. My flashlight beam landed on the crossarm of a pole and I froze. The blood just wasn't on the windshield. It was smeared across the wooden arm in thick congealed streaks, dripping down the sides. And there, wedged between the wire and the wood, was a pig, or at least what was left of one. Its body was blackened and bloated, its flesh split open in places to reveal charred muscle and bone. The head was lolled over to one side, the eyes cooked into white, sightless orbs. The stench was unbearable, a mix of rot and electricity. I gagged and turned my head away. Someone had obviously done this, dragged a dead pig up here and jammed it into the lines, but how, and more importantly, why? Again, I found myself sweeping my flashlight across the forest below, my breath now coming in these shallow panic gasps. From up here, the woods were an ocean of black. I did not want to go back down. The thought of being on the ground exposed and vulnerable quickly made my skin crawl, but staying up here wasn't really an option either. With shaking hands, I activated the controls, lowering the bucket slowly back to earth. As the ground rose to meet me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My driver's side door of the truck was now wide open. It stopped me in my tracks. My pulse was roaring in my ears. My flashlight was shaking as I scanned the ground around my truck. There didn't seem to be any footprints in the dirt or signs of anybody passing through. Just the gaping door, like an invitation or a warning. I stayed in that bucket for a few minutes longer, hovering just above the ground, fingers twitching over the controls. That silence was suffocating. Somewhere out in the dark, I heard a twig snap. "Who's out there?" I shouted. The woods seemed to swallow my words. Summoning what little nerve I had left, I lowered the bucket the rest of the way, stepped onto the ground. The air was heavier down here, thick with tension and the faint sour smell of decay. I slowly crept back towards the truck. When I peeked inside, I half expected somebody or something to lunge at me, but the cab was empty. On the driver's seat sat a rock, smooth and round, with the same strange symbol carved deep into its surface. The same symbol that was on my windshield. I grabbed the radio with trembling hands. "Lisa, you need to get somebody out here now," I said, voice barely even holding it all together. "There's somebody messing with me, leaving these weird symbols, blood. It all ain't normal." The radio cut off with this harsh screech of static. I yanked the device away from my ear, but it was dead. Headlights then flared behind me, cutting through the trees. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. The second team was here. I turned towards the light, waving my arms to flag them down. The rumble of their truck was the best sound that I'd heard all night. Two guys hopped out, Mike and Jerry, both seasoned linemen with a lot more gray to their hair than me. "You okay, kid?" Mike asked. His sharp eyes were scanning the scene around me. "Not really," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. There's people out here. I saw them in the trees and there's blood. Look, they smeared it on my truck, it's on the pole, and there's a pig stuffed into the lines. Dead, obviously, but it's up there." Mike and Jerry quickly exchanged a glance. "Pig?" Jerry asked, eyebrows raised. "Yeah, burned to a crisp. Whoever's doing this just ain't messing around, it's..." Thunk. A rock sailed out of the trees and bounced off the hood of the second truck. We all froze. "What the fuck?" Jerry muttered, turning towards the woods. Another rock flew and this one landed a few feet away. Then another, closer, striking the ground hard enough to send gravel flying. "Whoever's out there, knock it off!" Mike bellowed, his voice carrying throughout the forest. Mike grabbed the flashlight from the truck and stomped towards the trees. "Mike, don't," I said, but he was already standing at the tree line, shining his beam into the darkness. For a moment, the world stood still, and then from the shadows came a voice. "Leave." It was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the clearing like a gunshot. Mike froze, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. "Let's just finish this and go," I said, my voice tight. "Whatever this is, it's not worth sticking around for." Mike hesitated, then grunted and walked back to the truck. "Fine, let's just get it done." The three of us worked in this tense silence, our flashlights cutting through the dark as we inspected the lines. The blood was still there, thick and drying, but the pig was now gone. Only a charred stain remained where its body had been. The rocks would occasionally still come in, hitting the trucks and the ground, occasionally even the poles that we were working on, but none of us even said anything. There was nothing to say. By the time we finished, my nerves were shot. We piled back into our trucks, ready to put this place behind us. I started my engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see somebody or something staring back at me, but it was just the forest. Mike's voice came over the radio. "Let's move. I ain't spending another minute out here." "Copy that," I said, gripping the wheel, like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. We pulled out, headlights carving through the dense woods as we followed that narrow trail back to the main road. As we hit the edge of the forest, I saw a figure standing at the side of the trail, barely visible in the glow of my taillights. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by shadow. I floored it, not daring to look back. We never really talked about that night again after that, Mike or Jerry or I. That outage was officially blamed on a storm that had supposedly weakened the lines, but I knew better. Whatever was out there wasn't natural, and I don't want to encounter it again. There's something about the desert that sticks with you long after you've left it behind. It isn't the beauty, though I guess there's plenty of that to go around if you like barren stretches of broken land, broken only by the occasional burst of color from stubborn flowers, or even hulking shadows of distant mountains. It's not the quiet either. You hear your own heartbeat, the faint crunch of gravel underneath your boots, or even worse, something you can't really explain. I've worked out in places like that for years now, charting property lines and dividing up land for developers who can't wait to transform solitude into something profitable. A certified land surveyor in Arizona isn't exactly a glamorous title, but it's a steady one, and it's taken me into some strange corners of the state. The job I'm about to tell you about still unsettles me to this day when I think back on it. It started out like most of my gigs usually did. A call comes in about a newly purchased developmental property east of the Valley Metro, one of those big money deals where they're itching to put up luxury strip malls or sprawling subdivisions. On the opposite of the property line were the residential lots, big half-acre spreads with houses that practically glowed underneath the sun. Between them, though, is where I'd call no man's land, a patch of wild desert scrubs, Palo Verde trees, brittle brushes, and the occasional dry creek. They needed me to fine-tune the boundaries, to make sure nobody could dispute what belonged to who. Simple work, really, boring even. But out in the middle of nowhere, it's easy for boring to turn quickly into something else. I got to the site just as the morning sun started to bake the horizon. The sky was pale blue, empty except for a vulture circling off in the distance. The first order of business was setting up my base station. I'd learned over the years to keep it close to my truck, not because I was lazy, but because I liked the comfort of knowing my escape was never more than a few feet away. I unfolded my tripod, secured the equipment, and booted up the GPS system. It hummed to life, ready to record every inch of this desolate place. With the base station now in place, I grabbed the handheld receiver and GPS rod, then started walking around. The terrain was rough, patchwork of loose sand and jagged rocks, and the occasional burst of stubborn greenery. A rattlesnake slithered across my path at one point, its scales gleaming in the sunlight, almost like tiny mirrors. I gave it a wide berth, boots crunching on the gravel as I made my way to that first property corner. The work was slow and repetitive. Mark a point, check it against the map, adjust and repeat. I tried to let my mind wander, but the desert had this way of dragging your thoughts off into uncomfortable places. It wasn't long before I felt that prickling sensation of being watched. I quickly reminded myself it's just the emptiness playing tricks on me. There was not a soul around for miles and miles, just the faint rustle of the wind and the distant hum of an airplane. Still, I occasionally kept glancing over my shoulder. By the time I reached that dry creek, the sun was high in the sky, glaring down with this merciless intensity. I paused and took a sip from my canteen, wiped the sweat from my brow, and squinted at the shallow trench ahead of me. A thin trickle of water wound its way through the rocks, more of a suggestion of a stream than an actual one. Something unnatural was in the middle of all that rugged wilderness, though. A filter, cobbled together from a metal frame and some kind of mesh, was hanging in the water. It wasn't much to look at, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. People had been here recently. recently enough to leave their handiwork behind. I took another swig of water, trying to shake off the unease, and moved on. But as I trudged up that far bank, I couldn't stop my eyes from scanning the brush, looking for more signs of life where there shouldn't be any. And I found them. A clothesline stretched between two scraggly trees, a frayed rope sagging under the weight of a few faded rags. A rusted metal drum lay half hidden in the scrub. The lid was ajar to reveal what looked like empty food cans and discarded wrappers. I was not alone out here. It was probably just a homeless camp though, somebody looking for a place to lie low. Nothing really too serious or even to worry about, as long as I kept my distance. But I found myself stepping quieter. My movements were more deliberate now. The desert was no longer just an empty space. By the time I reached that next marker, my nerves were on edge. I kept glancing up from my work, scanning the horizon for any form of movement. But there was never anything, of course, just the same endless expanse of desert. I tried to focus, but it was like the desert just had other plans for me that day. Every time I bent down to mark a point or check the GPS, I'd hear a faint rustle or a crunch of gravel that didn't match my own movements. It was obviously and had to be animals. The desert's full of them, scurrying about in the heat. But the sound didn't match any animal that I could tell. It was heavier, deliberate, footsteps. I was way too far in to quit now though. I needed to just finish the job and just get out of here. Developers did not pay to be jumpy. So I kept going, moving along that dry creek and back towards the property corners. And that's when I started finding more signs. Cigarette butts scattered in the dirt, each one crushed flat like it'd been stomped out in a hurry. A plastic water bottle, sun-warped and brittle, half buried in the sand. And then there's footprints, bare feet by the looks of it, pressing deep into the loose earth near that creek. And they didn't look too old either. Someone had definitely been here, and maybe they were even still here. I tightened my grip on my GPS rod, almost like it was a weapon. I thought about heading back to the truck, but I did not want to leave this job unfinished. That was the kind of thing that got you a reputation. Besides, I hadn't actually seen anybody. Yet. I think I was just overreacting. That's when I noticed a boulder. It was up ahead, standing out against the flat landscape. I needed to mark the property corner just beyond it, so I approached it cautiously, the shadows around it seeming darker than they should have been. When I came around the side of the boulder, I froze. There they were, an old man and a boy standing no more than 10 feet away. The man had this wiry build, his skin leathered and cracked by the years inside the sun. His eyes were bloodshot, his nose a mess of broken capillaries. He clutched a double-barrel shotgun in one hand. The barrel angled lazily in my direction. The boy couldn't have been any older than 12, but he held a .22 rifle with ease that suggested that he'd done it before. "The hell are you and what the hell are you doing out here?" The man quickly barked, his voice rough, a smoker's rasp. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I am a surveyor. I'm just marking some property lines and really, that's it." "Property lines?" he spat out. "This land don't belong to nobody but us. Been out here 10 years, minding our own business." I glanced at the boy. He was watching me intently, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. The rifle looked like it had seen better days, but I wasn't about to test whether it still worked or not. I understand," I said carefully, "but this land's been bought. Developers are coming through. I'm literally just doing my job." The old man's face twisted into something ugly now. He took a swig from a clay jug hanging from his belt. "Developers," he muttered. "Think they can just take what ain't theirs. Well, not this time. Not here." I was doing my best to keep my breathing steady. The heat, the guns, the wild look in their eyes, it was all far too much. "You can put that gun down," I said. I'm not here to take anything, just marking lines. The boy shifted, his grip on the rifle tightening now. Maybe we don't want no lines, he said, his voice high and cracking. All right, easy now, I said, taking a step back. The old man let out this harsh laugh, his breath stinking of booze. You scared, surveyor? You should be. The desert don't like strangers. Then he fired his shotgun into the air, the sound ripping through the silence. I flinched, ears ringing as a flock of birds took off from a nearby tree. You don't belong here, he said, leveling the shotgun again, this time pointing it just off to my side. I nodded quickly, trying to defuse the situation. I'll tell the developers, I lied. I'll let them know you're here. Maybe we can figure something out. The old man squinted at me, his expression now hard to read. You do that? Yeah, I said, words tumbling out before I could even think. I'll tell them. They don't need to mess with you. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, reached into his pocket and pulled out this crumpled $50 bill. So old and faded it barely even looked like money anymore. He shoved it into my hand. Good, he said. Now get the hell out of here before I change my mind. I nodded, backing away slowly. The boy watched me with unblinking eyes, his fingers still twitching far too close to that trigger. As soon as I was out of sight, I turned and bolted, my legs feeling like jelly, but I pushed myself back toward the truck. When I finally reached it, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I grabbed my phone. Hello, I said. I need to report vagrants, armed vagrants, on the developmental property east of the Metro Valley, possible moonshiners. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, calm and detached. Copy that, we'll send somebody out to investigate. Are you clear of the area? Yeah, I said, glancing in the rearview mirror as I started up my engine. I'm clear. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel clear again, though. I didn't look back as I drove away, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched still. It was like their eyes were still on me, boring into the back of my skull, even as I bounced over the uneven dirt road. The radio chatter faded into the background noise, drowned out by the thudding of my pulse in my ears. The further that I got from that boulder, the more the landscape began to blur together, an endless expanse of sand and scrub, stretching far out into infinity. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't escape those words the old man had said to me. Desert don't like strangers. When I finally reached the main road, I pulled over and cut the engine and just sat there for a minute, staring out at the barren horizon. The sun was close to setting now. I told myself it was just the heat messing with my head. The sun was getting close to setting now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out that crumpled $50 bill. It felt wrong holding it. That paper was so thin and fragile, and it reeked of something faintly sour, like old sweat or mildew. The face on the bill was faded and distorted, as though it had been left out in the sun for far too long. I tossed it quickly into the passenger seat and started up my truck again, eager to put as much distance between me and that place as I possibly could. Back at the office, I made my report. I didn't mention the shotgun or the crazed ranting. I just said that I encountered squatters, possibly were armed, and they were likely trespassing. Figured it wasn't really my job to play sheriff. Let somebody else deal with all that. I never saw those two again, and I suspect they were either run off or arrested.